Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Go Big or Go Home. I am Old Man Troy, joined by the youngster, Kevin Cunningham, a.k.a. Kid Cunny on Twitter. What's going down in the Orange State today, the home of the oranges? What's going on?
You must like your orange juice, Troy.
I do. I love myself a good, ripe orange, peeling it, the nice thick layer, and then you get that nice, juicy orange underneath. Yes, I love oranges. I will not deny it.
I actually never have orange. Well, I had orange juice when I was about 10 years old. One morning, I had orange juice, and I had a travel basketball practice at like 8 a.m. that morning. And so travel basketball in the state of Florida, even at 10 years old, they basically push you to death. Because that's AAU travel basketball in the state of Florida, even, 17-ish years ago. So I had orange juice that morning, and about halfway through practice, I threw up, and I decided self-consciously that it was the oranges because I basically never have orange juice, and that morning I had orange juice, and then I puked. So that basically scarred me for life with orange juice.
Well, that's not good. Well,
no.
I love myself some nice oranges. They have to be very ripe. They have to be very nice. I love fruit. I love all fruit. But this is not a fruit show. This is a sports show. So we're going to move right into it. NCAA basketball. I'm ready for basketball. NCAA baseball tournament going on. And we're going to turn it back over to Kevin because he's got all the latest updates on all of the NCAA Big Ten participants. And I know it's not going to take very long, but I still have to turn it back over to you to touch on all of these games.
Yeah, basketball season, Troy, it's coming soon, in November-ish. So we're getting there. But baseball, got to talk a little Big Ten baseball. We did last show probably as much Big Ten baseball as I've ever talked about in my life during one sitting, I suppose. And coming into this NCAA tournament, there were 5 Big Ten teams, and Iowa was, I guess, the hot team. They won the Big Ten tournament. They had Jake Adams, who I think was tied for the NCAA lead in home runs after the Big Ten tournament, so going into the NCAA tournament. I think he was tied or he was one behind. I think he tied the Big Ten lead in the Big Ten tournament. I think it was the Big Ten championship game. He hit 2 of them to tie the Big Ten lead all time, not just this season. He was like 12 home runs ahead of second place this season. But so Jake Adams, Iowa, they were the hot team going in the NCAA tournament. Michigan, Maryland, Nebraska, and Indiana were the other 4 that got in. We talked about Big Ten baseball, how Big Ten fans in general shouldn't necessarily expect a ton from these teams. Of the 16 hosts, so there were basically 16 little pods of 4, within their own little regional, and the host school would play every single game at their host facility, and none of these 5 Big Ten teams were the number 1 seed. I think there was either 1 or 2 seeds. I think Michigan was one of the 2 seeds. I can't remember who the other one was. But so the first games of this NCAA tournament, it's a double elimination thing between your little pot of 4. And Michigan, Maryland, Nebraska, Indiana all lost their first game. So they basically had to win out the rest of the weekend in order to get to the Sweet 16, a.k.a. Super Regionals. Iowa, the hot Big Ten team, the number 4 seed in their pot of 4, actually beat and upset number 1 Houston in that first game. So everything looked perfectly well for Iowa going forward. The other 4 teams, not so much. Second game comes around, Michigan and Nebraska. They lost the second games. They were eliminated. They were done. Maryland, Indiana, they won their second games, so they're still alive. Iowa, their second game, they lost. So I think Iowa lost to a 3 seed in Texas A&M. It was either the 2 or the 3, obviously. But so they lost to Texas A&M that second game. Jake Adams hit his 28th home run of the season. That led all of college baseball. He became the all-time Big Ten leader in a single season. So all-time Big Ten home run leader, single season. Jake Adams from Iowa. Obviously, hats off to him. We've been giving our hats off to him since we've been covering Big Ten baseball because he has been the lone, I guess, individual bright spot. He was voted the most, I think he was unanimous player of the year in Big Ten baseball this past season. So congrats to him on getting that record despite the loss in the second game. So moving to the third game, you had Maryland and Indiana and Iowa, each at 1-1 after the first two games. They couldn't lose that third game in order to advance, and they all lost their third games. So Maryland, Indiana lost their third. They were done. And then Iowa got its second crack, or I guess Houston got its second crack at Iowa for that 1-4 matchup again, and Houston got the best of Iowa in the ninth inning. Houston got a couple runs, I think, to make it a 2-run game, and that ended it. But so that's it for Big Ten baseball. All five teams, boom, gone, right quick. So not a ton of updates. Again, hats off to Jake Adams. He hit actually his 29th homer against Houston that second time around. So I think he definitely leads all of college baseball. I don't know if he leads it by 2 now or by 1 or what the update is now as of this second recording on a Monday. But hats off to Jake Adams and Iowa, especially after that first win over Houston to start the tournament off. I was looking at it like, okay, Iowa actually has a shot here. The host school of their pot of 4 already has 1 loss, but now Houston's playing Texas A&M for the right to move on to the Super Regional. So Iowa was the lone winner in the Big Ten to get that first game going. So it was kind of all I guess if you wanted to put money on a team for the Big Ten to get to the Sweet 16, it was Iowa coming in, and they looked hot to start, but lost their next 2 games. Big Ten baseball is done for the season. Troy, do you have any little additions you want to add to that?
No, it just goes to show you. We talked about it on the last show, so make sure you check out the website, The Grilling Truth. And if you want to listen to what we talked about, Kevin, Big Ten baseball kind of at a disadvantage in my mind just because of the climate, just because of where baseball is. And so for 5 teams to make the NCAA tournament, my hat's off to the baseball conference this year. They didn't advance, but again, I also believe that there is some recruiting deficiencies for baseball to get a kid to come into the climate to play baseball. I mean, if you're looking and you're one of the top players in the country, and a little bit, you talked about this with football, is Big Ten is cold, and you don't know when you can get outside and practice. And not a lot of these places do have the indoor facilities that are going to simulate being outside, and it's still not the same outside in the elements comparative to an indoor facility. So my hat's off that 5 Big Ten teams got into the tournament straight out. They didn't fare so well. But congrats to the Big Ten participants, and also congrats to Mr. Adams for just balling it and cranking balls out of the ballpark. I mentioned recruiting deficiencies, Kevin. That was kind of my lead into our next topic. Not even going to give a teaser to the fans. I'm going to turn it back over to you. Some big breaking news in the Big Ten this afternoon as we're recording our show, or before we recorded. But the news is very new, and it's going to be fun to talk about this.
Yeah, and I was actually prepping for the show. I was getting all my baseball notes done. Typically I have a little Word doc open during this show while we record it, and I've got, little notes like, hey, these 4 teams all lost their first Big Ten game. Jake Adams did this. Iowa then got eliminated, as did the rest of them, by this certain time. I don't read off my little script here, but I have little general notes, and I was making little notes about things and topics and what we can cover because, again, the main 2 revenue sports, just by pure ratings and clicks on the internet, it's very easy to see. That's basketball and football. Those sports are done. So we were looking at baseball, NCAA tournament. That was obvious. We had to cover that. But so I was looking, and then all of a sudden pops up on my television screen, Ohio State head coach Thad Matta, the basketball head coach, got fired. And everyone around Ohio State circles and people that, just cover Ohio State athletics, cover Ohio State basketball, talk always about how nice and how great Thad Matta is as a guy. And it actually, one of the first things that came out about it too was that he would help find his replacement. He was going to help the athletic director and the school that fired him just, an hour prior or however long it was. This all occurred this afternoon. Again, we record on Monday. So he's willing to help find his replacement, and he wants to be the guy that Ohio State can go to and say, hey, what does this job exactly entail? And there's no better place to get it from the person that just got fired, and to what to expect and why they got fired. And typically that doesn't happen. Usually if you get fired, you're not willing to help your former employer find your replacement. So Thad Matta's heart, obviously in the right place. He doesn't feel as though Ohio State completely screwed him over or anything. It's just a matter of what it was. And there is a lot to get into this. But my initial thought was, well, Ohio State these last few years before I did my research, it turned out it was the last 4 years that they haven't even gotten past the second round of the NCAA tournament. And in today's college basketball world, where you have 68 teams making it and one and dones, and if you have one or two 4-star recruits even, you're going to make the tournament. You're going to win 21, 22 games. You can go 22-10 in the Big Ten, be a fine program, and make the NCAA tournament. It's really not that difficult if you're in a good conference like the Big Ten is year in, year out. Even last year, and I don't have the number off the top of my head, but there were a lot of Big Ten teams in the NCAA tournament, and it was a very down year for the Big Ten, at least at the top. Depth-wise, there was a lot of depth, a lot of solid teams, as the NCAA tournament proved. But my initial thought was, okay, Thad Matta, great coach, great guy, but at the same time, these last few years, he just hasn't been getting it done at Ohio State. And the off season, even this year, leading into next season, the 2017-18 season was not going well. A couple players had quit the team in the off season, getting DUIs and stuff like that. So Ohio State basketball is definitely trending downward. It wasn't a huge surprise to me, but those that cover Ohio State athletics were definitely sad, because I know this as a general sports writer, that if you have a coach year in, year out who's helpful and just kind and always looks forward to talking to the media and answering questions and giving, more than what the media asks for, you love those coaches. No matter who they are, no matter how great or how terrible their teams are. There are some coaches that I cover for, high school sports in Wisconsin that their teams are absolutely terrible year in, year out. That has nothing to do with them as a coach. That's just personnel and just the way it is. And those coaches are very helpful, and so I love talking to those coaches every single year about their teams, whether they win or whether they lose every single game. Thad Matta was a guy that people respected and loved around the community, but even some people around the community knew, like, okay, Ohio State basketball is trending downward. We all think, and that does not include me, but everyone basically thinks that is around Ohio State circles, thinks that Ohio State is a top-end basketball job, not necessarily Duke, North Carolina, Kansas, Kentucky, but that next tier, top 10, top 15 level job. And Troy and I will certainly dive into that. But what were your initial thoughts when you found out the news, Troy?
Well, you broke the news to me, and I asked you kind of the details of it. It's not surprising to me. It's really not. Thad Matta, great guy from what I've seen. I've never met him personally. But when you talk about the Ohio State circle and the team trending down, they haven't been able to go out and compete on the recruiting trail. A number of years back, Ohio State was making good deep runs into the NCAA tournament. I would disagree that it's a top 10 job. I don't think it's a job that is out there for a coach to make a major leap from, if he's already in a D1 solid program, to go to Ohio State. But I think it's a good job for somebody that might be at a smaller D1 school that likes to hit the recruiting trail. But I'm going to tell you what, Kevin, recruiting in the Big Ten is not an easy task. Big Ten basketball, we were down on Big Ten basketball for a lot of our shows, saying this is what you get. But, you and I don't want to say we changed our tune at the end of the season, but we realized that a lot of these teams were young. A lot of these teams were trying to get to play together. And there's a lot of things going on that are good in the Big Ten. Would I say they're the best team in basketball? No. You and I are on the same page that next fall, this conference will probably be the best football conference in the United States. Basketball, probably not. But they also got some teams in, and they got teams that made some noise in the tournament. You got the likes of a Wisconsin, who's always on the cusp of going into the tournament as an at-large or a team that can contend for the Big Ten title. Michigan had a great year. You got a lot of teams that are out there that you have to recruit against. And if you're not able to win the recruiting battle, at least stay on par with the other teams, you're going to be in the bottom tier of the Big Ten. And that is not acceptable. I mean, the Big Ten is very competitive. So I've known a lot of coaches that are nice guys. Yeah, like you said, nice guy, do anything, give the shirt off his back for a kid, will make sure his kids graduate, but he's not winning. And at the end of the day, we talk about these non-revenue sports, the baseballs, the softballs, the lacrosse. They're supported by basketball and football. And the only way to generate revenue, Kevin, in basketball is to fill the stadium and get to the NCAA tournament to get that bonus money. And if you're not making it past the second round, or if you're not even going to the tournament, you're losing out on millions of dollars. And so I can understand where they went. Ohio State basketball has been down. Ohio State doesn't scare anybody lately. A few years back, like I said, yeah, Ohio State was one of those games you circled on the calendar. That this is a must-watch, an Ohio State versus Michigan game in basketball, and Ohio State versus Wisconsin even a few years back. But now Ohio State's at the bottom of the barrel, and they have to get out of it. The only way you get out of it is to recruit. And if the school feels he's not recruiting the right talent, I mean, I don't know how an AD can be the judge of that, but you look at the wins and losses, and you look at how competitive is this team. Is this team a piece away? Is this team getting better? Those are things that go into evaluating a coach. They have this nice long evaluation tool. I went through it as a college coach. But I'll tell you this, Kevin. You can get perfect checks in everything up to win-loss record. It comes down to wins and losses and generating revenue. And if you're not winning games, basketball games particularly, you're not going to generate revenue, and therefore you're going to be on a hot seat and you're going to get ridden out of town if you can't win. Because you're not going to make the boosters happy, you're not going to make the school happy because you're not bringing in money. So at the end of the day, all this fluff and all these things, I wish an athletic director would just come out and say he stunk, he didn't win basketball games, so we let him go. I don't like all this political nonsense. Oh, well, this and this and this, and I haven't read into it yet. This and this and this and this and this and that. No, bottom line, he didn't win games, he's not making you money, so you fired him. That's the way that it works. Kevin, you had an interesting comment to me, and I want you to elaborate on this. You had mentioned that Thad Matta is actually going to be in the search committee to help find his replacement. I find that really intriguing, that you're going to fire a guy but let him be part of the hiring process. I think that's crazy talk. What about you?
Oh, yeah. It's very weird. And that's, why I brought up, hey, people love him and talk about how great he is. And if he's that selfless and just wants to be, wants Ohio State basketball to be great, then good for him, I guess. It's just very weird, and it's something I've never heard of, literally ever. And, I haven't lived long on this planet, only 26 years, but have never heard of anyone getting fired and then saying, hey, you know what, I'll help you, replace me. That'd be great. Yeah,
I've heard of, Kevin, coaches retiring that are part of the process. Right. That's totally different. That's totally different. I'm retiring. This is my last year, and if you're retiring, you've probably already groomed your successor on the bench. So it's not going to be, I have to go out on this nationwide search. I've already groomed my successor, so give my successor the job. I've never heard of a coach being fired but then sitting on a selection committee. That would be very, very odd to me. If I got fired from a job, but they're like, hey, do you want to help hire your replacement? Oh, yeah, sure, no problem. Let me sit on the interviews. What is that? I didn't mean to interrupt, but it just kind of sparked something in me. But go ahead.
No, yeah, very weird. And depending on which, recruiting expert, quote unquote, site you want to use, here's what I'm looking at. Ohio State's national class coming into 2017. So these are incoming freshmen. They have a 4-star guy and a 3-star guy signed. This is an Ohio State team that went, I think it was 19-15, something like that. 17-15 was not good. So Ohio State basketball, bad. Incoming freshman class ranks 71st nationally or 11th in the Big Ten. So again, if you really do think Ohio State is a top 10, top 15 job, Troy, you said it's not a top 10 job. I'm completely on board with that. I think it's, top 25. It's a big university in the Big Ten. So
no way, Kevin. Not even top 25.
Maybe I'm stretching. I'm sure I could list 25 better programs, college basketball jobs. You're completely overshadowed by football, and there's no history to Ohio State basketball whatsoever, and that was another point that people wanted to try and make, backing Thad Matta. And a lot of these people, I think, saying, hey, he should have kept his job. What was Ohio State before him? Now you look at Ohio State, and, if you look now and the very recent history, it's been bad. And so it's only been trending worse and worse. And his incoming freshman class, not good. So there's no uptick, hey, you know what, we've got some talent coming in. We were bad last year, but now we've got some talent. It may take a year or two, but Ohio State basketball will be back. Well, no, that's not the case. It's just looking like it's going to keep trending downward. So until a new head coach comes in, class of 2018, freshmen come in, who knows where Ohio State basketball will be at. But I agree that Ohio State basketball before Thad Matta, not good. I mean, he came in 2004. The team made the NCAA tournament, didn't get to a Sweet 16 in 2000, 2001, 2002. They didn't make it in 2003, didn't make it 2004. It took Thad Matta 1 year, 2005, to not make it, and then he made it basically every year after that, outside of the recent history. But so, you can look at his accolades and say, okay, 13 years Thad Matta was at Ohio State, and there was no real history for Ohio State basketball before him. He comes in, and they go to a national title game, 2 Final Fours in general, an Elite Eight, a couple Sweet 16s, a couple second-round appearances, and realistically, I mean, I'm a Duke fan, and once in a while Duke will get knocked out in the second round. It happens this past year. So you just run into a really good team, a really hot team. It only takes one game of hitting 14 threes to say, oops, we lost by 5. We got upset. Oh, well, sometimes you have a second-round upset in the NCAA tournament. Michigan State this past year, didn't have a great year, ended up as like an 8 or 9 seed, so you run into Kansas in the second round. That just happens. Tom Izzo, no real ill will toward, finishing in the second round once every so often. So 2 Final Fours, an Elite Eight, couple Sweet 16s, couple second-round exits, that's 7 years. So 7 of his 13 years were, at least perfectly fine. And you can say, I mean, those 7 finishes basically on par with anyone. I mean, 2 Final Fours, no one's going to certainly boo-hoo about that. An Elite Eight, a few Sweet 16s, that's fine. It's just the program the last 4 years has been trending down. And it's not as though you can sprinkle in a Sweet 16 here and Elite Eight there. Oh, look, he made the Final Four a couple years ago. It's not like that. It just recent history has shown that things are going down. The recruiting class has gone down. The athletic director, when asked about this, that was his primary reason of firing Thad Matta, was because of recruiting. So there's no, again, going back to my point before, there's no, hey, look, we have young talent coming in. It may take a year or two, but we'll be back. That's not even the case here. So to help try and infuse some excitement into Ohio State basketball, it'll be very interesting to see who this new coach is. I saw just a random rumor about Billy Donovan, because, of course, Ohio, and this was, I think, more of a joke than anything, but Ohio State took Urban Meyer basically from Florida. I mean, Urban Meyer retired, quote unquote, and then, had a year or two off, then went to Ohio State. But so Billy Donovan was the head coach, won a couple titles at Florida, went to the NBA, and now it's like, okay, Oklahoma City's doing nothing. So could Ohio State take another Florida coach from the basketball ranks or basketball side of things? And so Billy Donovan's name, I'm sure, will probably be surfaced at some point. I would assume he would not leave an Oklahoma City team to go back into college and go to Ohio State. Again, Troy doesn't even think Ohio State's a top 25 job. So why would Billy Donovan leave for that? I'm all with that. It'll be interesting to see who his new coach is, or who Ohio State's new coach is. To me, I mean, if you can lure a top, associate, top assistant from a Duke like a Jeff Capel, I think that's Duke's next guy after Coach K is Jeff Capel. If you can get a guy like that, to really buy in and think that Ohio State's a top 10, top 15 level job, that's awesome. I mean, that's a win because Troy and I, not that we're certainly right 100% of the time, but we don't think we're crazy in thinking Ohio State's not that perfect next level job. I think, like Troy said, if you're going up from Butler or Xavier, or a Rhode Island or, a VCU, these teams that have good teams once in a while, but you obviously want to get into the Big Ten and have great facilities. And it may not be a basketball power, but that's what some people think Ohio State is that very great next level job. We just don't think it's there. It'll be interesting to see which coach they lure in. It'll be interesting to see how big of a name it is. It'll be interesting, especially at this point in the off season when recruiting is basically done. And we've got a little Big Ten basketball recruiting topic to bring up, but it'll be interesting to see the coach that Ohio State brings in. I don't think it's going to be anyone spectacular, but a lot of people around Ohio State circles that think this is a top 10, 15 level job think that unless you're, Coach K, Tom Izzo, John Calipari, Bill Self, Roy Williams, if Ohio State calls, you're going to listen and you're going to have at least a thought about it, and I don't think that's necessarily the case.
Well, Kevin, a couple of things here. First, I find the time of the firing odd. I know the recruiting is done now, but to fire a coach in June, it just seems odd to me that they had to wait till June. You pretty much know who's – I mean, I know you don't know exactly who's on your books, but here's the thing. The 71st recruiting class, okay. It may even go down with that because now that the coach has been fired, Thad Matta recruited these kids, and as a high school senior, okay, I'm committed to Ohio State, but I've also committed to the coach. And it'll be interesting to see how many of these recruits now decommit and go somewhere else. So there's a whirlwind going on here. And I want to touch on this point again. This is not a top 25 job in my mind because there's a lot of work involved. If you look at all the great coaches, Kevin, I'll use your Duke Blue Devils. How much nitty-gritty recruiting work does Coach K do? Like literally how much rolling up his sleeves does he do? How much basketball tape does he watch on these kids? How many games does he actually go visit? What do you think your guess would be, Kevin? I pretty much have my mind up about what the answer is, but I'm throwing a point out here. How much nitty-gritty recruiting does Coach K do?
I'll put it quickly. I mean, I think John Calipari does a lot of his recruiting. That's a rare occasion. That's just him loving recruiting. Coach K, Jeff Capel, like I said, he's the main guy that has turned Duke into this, not necessarily one-and-done factory, but has embraced the one-and-dones, and that's something Coach K didn't do. So it's Jeff Capel, the top assistant, who I think will be the eventual head coach at Duke, say 5 years down the line. I don't think that's a ridiculous timeline. He's been doing the bulk of recruiting. I think once you have a recruit really looking at Duke, then maybe Coach K will say, hey, you should choose us over Kentucky because. You should choose us over Michigan State because. is he going to fly out to Minnesota and California and Nevada and New York and Jersey and Texas and Louisiana and Florida? Probably not. That's Jeff Capel. That's Jeff Capel's understudies. So Coach K in general, probably not doing a bunch of flying for recruits until they're seriously interested.
Yeah, and that's why I brought it up. Unless it's a 5-star, good 4-star, Coach K may look at the tape, but he's not going to make that personal visit. Heck, Kevin, I compare this D3, D2 soccer. I did a lot of recruiting as a coach. I had to. I don't have the funds. But I want to tell you what, a lot of these personal appearances, a lot of the communication, my assistant coach, this is D3 soccer, Kevin, D2, D3. That's the guy that usually has the initial contact. Then my assistant would come to me and say, this kid is interested. Then I got my butt in the car and I went to a game. Then I introduced myself. The nitty-gritty work of selecting prospects, so I call them prospects, or recruits, is usually done by your assistant coaches. They weed it out. They find the kids that they think will fit the program. The head coach solidifies the deal then with a personal appearance, all the hoops, all the whistles, all the bells, done by the head coach, but the nitty-gritty work is done by the assistants. So for people to think if Thad Matta could not recruit at Ohio State, then bringing in a big-name guy is not really the answer, but they're probably going to hire a good assistant coach and maybe change the recruiting trail. But I want people to realize that just by firing the coach, and if it's all recruiting, be careful what you're asking for and the reason why you fired him. Have the big kahunas to tell the public he didn't win enough games. Don't give me this blah, 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 blah. He can't recruit. Okay, well, that's his whole staff. So it gets me riled up, Kevin, when these ADs make up these reasons when at the end of the day it's about wins and losses. But I want people to know, former college soccer coach, D3, D2, I didn't even do all my recruiting. I did a lot, but I didn't do it all. I didn't roll my sleeves up every night and make 50 phone calls. My assistant coach did. Then when the interest was there, like you said, Kevin, then I stepped in. Then I solidified the deal. Then I made it all nice and cozy with the parents. Then I personally actually, I'll take that back. My assistant coach personally invited them to their visit day. So we're talking small, irrelevant, Division II, Division III soccer, head coach not even doing all the recruiting. So I wanted to throw that point out there, Kevin, because I think you made a good point about that. As it dials into recruiting, though, we had a decommit happen, and I want to move into this because I think this is another great subject.
Yeah, and, well, I'll correct you quickly. It wasn't a decommit, but it was essentially a decommit. I guess before that, I wanted to get your quick take. Where do you think, and not that you have, your exact rankings of what level job Ohio State basketball is, but just quickly, what do you think Ohio State within the Big Ten? Where would they rank around? Would they be around 5? Would they be around 3? Would they be around 7, 8? Where do you think Ohio State lands in the Big Ten, just in general? Throwing all the coaches' players out the window, starting, clean
Eighth.
slate.
Eighth.
Fifth? Oh, eighth.
Yeah.
Okay.
Eighth.
So,
near the bottom. You got to look at a job like a Rutgers job. Who wants the Rutgers job? I'll even put Penn State down in that area. Penn State, that's a tough place to recruit. I would put them around 8, maybe 7. You could debate with me to get them to 7, but I think this is a job. You brought up the biggest point. You're overshadowed by football, and so you have to do remarkable things. And you put it on there. Thad Matta came in, a couple Final Fours, an Elite 8, and then poof, downhill after that. And it's never recovering. And again, that's why a third time's a charm. Just say you fired him because he didn't win games. It's tough to recruit. I don't care what sport it is. I don't care if it's basket weaving championship time recruiting the best basket weaver is tough. In sports and in recruiting, it is cutthroat. I've been there. I've been in the trenches. I've told you this a million times, Kevin. It is a tough business. And that's what recruiting is. It's a business. And if you're not good at it, you're not good at it. And if you're not going to get the right guys, you're not going to win games. So I guess you can peel the onion back and say, well, he doesn't recruit because you want to be nice to the guy. But as a fan, I want an AD to just come out with the kahunas and say, you didn't win. You're out of here. No more Mr. Nice Guy. You didn't win enough games for us. Bye-bye. We're getting somebody else. Done ranting. Take it away.
Couple quick things before we get into this last topic. I think Ohio State, just rolling through the Big Ten, I think they're probably on par with Illinois, even though Illinois has been a bad basketball team these last, 5, almost 10 years. Illinois has a lot more high-end basketball products than the state of Ohio does. So I think realistically, Ohio State may, have more, better facilities and whatnot, but Illinois, talent-wise, you've got a lot of talent in the state of Illinois. It's probably on par with that. There's no question Ohio State is behind Indiana. It's probably ahead of Iowa. Maryland, maybe ahead of Maryland. Michigan, right now, Michigan's kind of on the upswing. Probably on par, though. Michigan State certainly behind. Minnesota, I guess you could say it's above. Nebraska's certainly above. Northwestern, because of the academic issues that Northwestern has to face, I think it's harder at Northwestern to get top-end recruits, as, it isn't at Ohio State. Not to say Ohio State, you don't have to be smart, but it's just different than Northwestern. Penn State, certainly under. So I think Ohio State's probably around that 5, 6, 7, 8-ish range, probably not top 5, but again, you're completely overshadowed by football, and there's just no history behind it. So it's, you're embarking on your own trail here pretty much. I saw a quick stat with Thad Matta. He is one of the all-time 50th winning coaches in college basketball history, and of those 50, he is one of the 50. Of those 50 most winningest coaches of all time in college basketball history, he's taken the least amount of games to get on that list. So he has certainly had his success as a head coach. Recruiting-wise, I guess, not getting it done, that's not satisfactory to Troy. But it is a fact, and it's not all on him. It's part of the coaching staff, so it's not necessarily on him. It's part of, how he doles out recruiting and his assistants and how he basically handles recruiting, the assistants that really handle recruiting. So it's not all on him, but Ohio State's basketball is definitely taking a downturn. The last quick point I wanted to make was Brad Stevens at Butler before he went to the Boston Celtics. This is college basketball. You need top 15-ish recruiting classes to really, churn a top-level program year in, year out. You can have a down year here and there, but you need those high-end classes in the sport of basketball more than any other sport, because one player, 2 players can impact a game so greatly in the sport. So I think that Brad Stevens at Butler, he didn't necessarily get a bunch of 5 stars and 4 stars. I'm sure he had a couple 4 stars here and there. Gordon Hayward, certainly probably a 4-star. I don't know that off the top of my head, but Brad Stevens didn't do unbelievable recruiting jobs at Butler, but he was such an amazing coach, and that's why people view him as a top 5 coach already in the NBA, is because of X's and O's and finding mismatches and how to exploit defenses and how to put his defenses in the best situations to stop the other team. He's just a great coach. It's not necessarily all about recruiting in college basketball, even though it's a big part of success and winning. It's not all about recruiting. Just look at Washington, Lorenzo Romar. He had unbelievable recruiting classes and getting top 5 recruits year in, year out to Washington these last few years, and they were terrible. Markelle Fultz, the top overall prospect that people project to go number 1 to the Boston Celtics this year in the NBA draft later this month, he's from Washington, and they went like 9-22 as a team. The number 1 prospect in college basketball won 9 games. His biggest win was over like Oregon State, literally. That was his biggest win. So you've got these high-end talent kids. Lorenzo Romar obviously knows what he's doing on the recruiting trails, but he got fired. this offseason because it's like you're bringing in these top 5 talents and you're winning 9-10 games. It's a joke. He can't coach at all. So I'm not here to bash on Lorenzo Romar, but it's not all about recruiting. You have to be able to coach as well. So that's definitely part of it. Moving on, Michigan State. So like Troy said, decommitment, it wasn't necessarily a decommitment, but it basically was. I was following the story kind of throughout the weekend with my writing gig at Land of 10, and basically this kid, Brian Bowen, is, depending on your site, basically a top 15 recruit, class of 2017. He's a senior in high school. He's going to be a freshman this upcoming basketball season, college basketball. He was the final high-end recruit out there to be had. So it's June. It's late for a basketball recruit to recruit now. He was the last big name to do it. 6'7", small forward, coming from a national title-winning high school program. You're getting a ton of looks. And Michigan State offered this kid, Brian Bowen, since his freshman year. He got an offer his freshman year from Michigan State. He's from Saginaw, Michigan. He was big into Michigan State, throughout his time in high school. And he had teams like Arizona, Louisville, all these big-name programs listed as interested and had scholarship offers from those schools. Louisville, I think, offered him his sophomore year of high school, and then they just kind of fizzled out like, well, we'll offer you because you're an amazing talent, but we know that we're not too high on your list. There were other teams in there, but he was basically going to go to Michigan State. Didn't ever make it official, but everyone who's anyone thought he was going to Michigan State once, he put a cap on eventually. So Miles Bridges came back to school a couple weeks ago. This came out that, hey, I'm taking away, top 15, top 20 pick. Miles Bridges, a small forward. Sometimes will play the 4 because that's just today's game of basketball. Basically the same size as Bruce Bowen, certainly more thick, has more weight to him, probably as athletic. Brian Bowen, really athletic kid, going to be a really good player eventually, but he's 18 years old. And so Miles Bridges, of the same position, says, I'm going to come back. And Brian Bowen's like, well, hold on a minute. Maybe I don't want to go to Michigan State. And a lot of people will say, well, what are you doing this for? And eventually, June 3rd rolls around a couple days ago. It's June 5th as we're recording this. He commits to Louisville. And everyone's like, whoa, where did this come from? And it's like, oh, wait a minute, Miles Bridges came back. And it started coming out, rumors that, hey, once Bridges made this decision, it made Brian Bowen hesitate. And so Arizona was also in the mix. They had a couple guys from the NBA ranks, not NBA ranks, but could have been first-round picks, high-end second-round picks, decided to come back. There were more so guards than forwards, so Arizona doesn't necessarily fit into this like exactly Miles Bridges and Michigan State does, but Louisville also has a couple great wings. Dangadell, VJ King. VJ King was a 5-star recruit a year ago, didn't get a ton of playing time in action last season, but as a sophomore, I'm sure he'll get plenty of action now along with Brian Bowen. And Dangadell was also a solid part of Louisville last year, a solid piece. So it's weird that he is joining these two on the wings for Louisville this coming season. I guess, Troy, your initial thoughts, he's basically a lean toward Michigan State throughout his high school years and up until this year. And as of a couple weeks ago, until Miles Bridges says, hey, I'm coming back for one more year, Brian Bowen hesitates and says, well, then I'm going to Louisville. Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I told you before the show, as we were prepping for the show, that it seems to me that this guy wants to try to be a one and done, because you're going to go to Michigan State, and that's a Tom Izzo program. Freshmen typically aren't going to play a lot. However, when you look at the likes of what's going on in the scope of basketball, Bridges is going to play next year. So this kid is only going to get a handful of minutes a game. And he probably looks at it like, well, how are the scouts going to see me? And I hate to say that that's a selfish way, so on and so forth, but that is the selfish way of these kids today. And I don't think, I want to put it this way, I don't think this was purely his decision. I think that he had other lips in his ears, literally telling him, look, you can't, if you're not going to play at Michigan State, you're not going to get drafted. You're going to have to be in school for 2 or 3 years. You're not going to get on the court. So I don't know what Louisville promised him. But like you said, Louisville isn't a much different situation than Michigan State as far as the young talent. But I think that's what happened. He scared off because Bridges decided to come back because he must enjoy college life and have a chance to play college basketball. And this kid wants to play, and I think he is a greedy, wannabe, one-and-done pick if possible. I don't think it's going to happen at Louisville either. And he might play a little bit more at Louisville, but, you know, if I was him, I'm picking a school where I can step on the court and start as a freshman. I don't think he's starting at Louisville. Do you, Kevin?
Maybe, but the thing is, too, I mean, if they want to go and say, okay, VJ King is going to be our 2, and Dangadell is going to be our 3, and Brian, you can be our 4, or you'll be our 3, and we'll move Dangadell to the 4, you can make it work in today's college game. There's not exactly a ton of programs throwing 6'10", 6'11", 7-footers out onto the court. You'll probably have one at a time. You know, last year's Purdue team with Haas, the 7'2" kid, and Swanigan, who still was 6'9", that, you know, typically you don't have 2 great or large post players that don't stretch the floor. So even if Brian Bowen plays the 4 next year at whatever school he wants to, you know, 6'7", you're going to have mismatches. If you do have a big on him, he's certainly tall enough, certainly skilled enough, long enough to defend most college basketball 4s. So I'm sure he will play with Dangadell, VJ King on the wing and be a 2 or 3 or 4, whatever you want to categorize him in. I think he'll play, I guess, a little more, but realistically, again, Bridges is a bigger body. I think Bridges would be the 4. I think Brian Bowen would play his natural 3 spot that he'll be in the NBA eventually. So realistically, I mean, you've got 2 extremely talented teams, Louisville, Michigan State, both top 10 easily. I think Michigan State maybe a little better. But 2 top 10 teams, you've got wings that will eventually be in the NBA probably in Adele and King, and for Michigan State, Bridges. So I don't know. I think Brian Bowen will start for Louisville, but he's not going to get a ton of playing time. I think he'll get, you know, 25-ish, maybe 30 minutes. He'll be a regular rotation guy, probably 3rd or so in minutes. But I think he would have been 3rd or 4th at Michigan State. I think that Michigan State could have used a 3. I think that Josh Langford didn't have the greatest freshman year. He was like a top 15 recruit as a shooting guard this past season for Michigan State. They played a ton of freshmen. Langford was one of them. I'm sure he'll be the starting 2 next year. If you want to move Bridges to the 4 and have Ward as your 5, I know Michigan State had their starting front court miss all of last season, so they are getting them back due to redshirting and whatnot, eligibility stuff. So Michigan State will have plenty of bodies, but Louisville is not exactly lacking, and Louisville has more probably athletic wings than Michigan State does, especially when you add Bowen to the mix. So I don't think the playing time or starting would have been that much different. Maybe a little bit more playing time at Louisville. Maybe they promised him a starting job where Tom Izzo said, we're not going to promise you anything. We just had this amazing recruiting class last year. If you join the fold, you'll probably be, you know, tops off the bench. So that probably scared him away. That wouldn't surprise me. Like you said, if there were people in his ear saying, it's Michigan State, it's Tom Izzo, they just had probably Tom Izzo's best recruiting class a year ago. They're all back next year. They're a top 5 team, whatever site, magazine you want to look at. They're already telling you nothing's guaranteed. So I'm sure that's what Tom Izzo said. Nothing's guaranteed. You're going to have to fight for your spot. We got a ton of talent last year. They're all back. You know that with Bridges, but we're certainly into you. You're from Michigan. We've loved you since the start. You've loved us. Come play for us. You'll eventually be one of the stars here. But he, like you said, probably wants to be a one and done, probably doesn't want to eventually be a star. He wants to be a star. So that's probably what it was. And Louisville probably promised him a starting job where Michigan State didn't. I'm guessing that's where the difference came.
Yeah, unless we're a fly on the wall in those meetings, we will never know. But, it just comes, the perception. I'll just put it that way. I had a coach that once told me perception is reality. And so my perception is that he's a greedy one-and-done guy, and he wants to go where he can play. And, hey, there's nothing wrong with that. That's his choice. But that's not Michigan State. I mean, look, Bridges could have went out, but he knows if he comes back, he can probably improve his draft stock. He's a smart kid. I like what Bridges did. I like the fact that he came back because, he could have went to the NBA for the money this year and been a teen pick somewhere in there. But the guy knows he's got things to work on. And what would that get you being the 13th, 14th, 15th pick? And you're going to go to a team that is kind of in the mix, is kind of not in the mix, probably has some good players. You're still going to have to find your way. What Bridges is doing is going to improve his game another year and enjoy college life. This kid that all of a sudden decided that, I want to go because I want this, I want that. We talked about it last week, Kevin, and the week before, the role of recruiting and what these kids feel entitled to. The work ethic is not there. So when I see a Bridges go back to school, I'd love to meet this guy and this mammoth of a man in person, jump up as high as I could and pat him on the back because I'm not going to do it on my flat feet. I like that fact. This is a mature kid. Yeah, he's passed up millions upon millions of dollars having a guaranteed first-round contract to go back to school where he is risking some stuff. There's another season. There's an injury possibility, blah, blah, blah. But I'd love to pat this guy on the back because that's what college basketball is about, enjoying your time, getting your game better. This kid that all of a sudden wants to go to Louisville, good luck to you. I'm going to follow your playing time and see how that works out for you. That's all I got.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting. It'll certainly be if Louisville ever plays Michigan State, I think Michigan State fans will certainly heckle Brian Bowen for time to come. It'll be interesting to see his playing time. It'll be interesting to see how Louisville does this season, how he does. Like I said, Michigan State is a top 5 team no matter where you look in terms of way early preseason rankings. And I'm kind of aboard that. I think Troy and I have both said Michigan State's probably the best team in the Big Ten next year going in. So, again, light years ahead of the season, but it'll be interesting to see what comes of that. I think it's also interesting because you have guys that go to Kentucky and they know they're going to play with a bunch of stars, and Anthony Davis took like the 5th most amount of shots and was like 4th on the team in scoring per game, and he got picked number 1 overall. If you jump out to NBA scouts like you can play, you will jump out to NBA scouts saying you're going to, you can do things. Markelle Fultz plays for a 9-24 team, and he's going to be the number 1 pick. You can play with nobodies like Ben Simmons, like Markelle Fultz, or you can be with Anthony Davis and Michael Kidd-Gilchrist and John Wall and DeMarcus Cousins, and you'll be top 5 picks. That's one thing I wanted to throw out, that just because you're on a loaded team and because you only play 25 minutes a game instead of 31, 32, or, and this won't even happen at Louisville, but say Brian Bowen averages 16 at Louisville, only 12 at Michigan State. Again, Anthony Davis averaged, I think it was 10, 11 points a game. But NBA scouts knew this kid can frickin' play, and we know that the sky's absolutely the limit. So we'll pick you number 1 in the overall. That
yeah.
To go to a school.
Oh, go ahead.
To go to a school because of a little less playing time, or to play with not as many stars, or whatever the reason, just seems a little ridiculous to me. So I don't necessarily agree with that. I think, and last question to you, Troy, for me, my perspective, if Miles Bridges is a top 5, lock, like a Jason Tatum, a Josh Jackson, a Lonzo Ball, a Markelle Fultz, we're all for kids coming back in college. It certainly makes our, podcast here nicer to have a Miles Bridges come back to Michigan State and have Michigan State be a, projected top 5 team. That's obviously great for us. That's great for college basketball. That's great for college basketball fans. It's more interesting in the tournament. It's great. So Miles Bridges this coming year probably expected to be a top 10 pick. That's how loaded this incoming or this NBA draft class is for 2017. He is back-end lottery, 14, 15, maybe toward 20. That's where Bridges is at. If he's not in dire financial need, to come out and make $2-3 million to help, save his family, maybe save a brother's life, make food on the table much easier, to come back and join a top 5 Michigan State team again and, play with your team and love your coach and love your fans and the atmosphere of Michigan State and love college life, improve your draft stock a bit, for the heck of it, injury possibility, obviously certainly there, but unless you're a top 5 pick, if you're a top 5 pick, go. But if you're projected 15, 20, and, you can boost your stock and get up to, top 5, top 10 pick, I think that's awesome. So hats off to Bridges. If you're a top 5 pick, go to the NBA. I get it after 1 year. But I don't think Brian Bowen is of that mold. I think he could be top 10, top 15 pick, and he'll probably bolt. That's just what I think Troy and I are gathering from this little decision of his. So it'll be interesting to see what Bowen does. I don't necessarily agree with it just based on if it is Miles Bridges coming back or not. But be interesting to see. We love guys coming back like Bridges. But to me, if you're a top 5 pick, go. That's my thought. That's all I got on this subject, Troy.
Well, we looked at the clock. We talked about it in the pre-show, and we're like, no time limit on this podcast. We're always pushing an hour, and we're right up against the hour mark. So I think we've beaten these topics down into the ground, Kevin. Another great show today. For the youngster, Kevin Cunningham, a.k.a. Kid Cunny on Twitter, I am the old man, Troy. Find us both on Twitter, again, at Kid Cunny, at Troy Robert 967. Thanks for listening in. Join us next week on The Grueling Truth as we talk more Big Ten sports. Have a good day, everyone.